A sleek obsidian black Aston Martin, DB11, tore through the city streets, its engine a low growl of pure power. Behind the wheel, Christopher Davies, a man whose net worth was discussed in financial journals, glanced at the passenger seat. There, Brooke Summers, stunning and artfully distressed, clutched her stomach. This was an emergency, a detour from his carefully planned life. His phone buzzed on the console, flashing a picture of his pregnant wife, Jessica. He ignored it. He was busy being the hero for the woman beside him. He pulled into the exclusive private entrance of the city's most prestigious medical facility, a place built for the elite. He was about to demand the best for the best. He had no idea he was a guest in a kingdom he never knew existed, walking into a judgment he could never have foreseen. The Hartman Medical Center wasn't just a hospital, it was a statement. Its gleaming glass and steel facade rose into the skyline like a monument to modern medicine and immense wealth. Valets in crisp grey uniforms moved with silent efficiency accustomed to the city's most powerful figures. Christopher Davies didn't wait for one. He brought the Aston Martin to a screeching halt directly in front of the main entrance, leaving the engine running as he vaulted out. "Help, I need a doctor. Now!" He barked, his voice accustomed to instant obedience. He rounded the car to help Brooke, who managed a convincingly feeble moan as she leaned heavily against him. She was an actress by ambition, and today she was giving the performance of a lifetime. A slight dizzy spell after a champagne brunch had been masterfully spun into a potential medical crisis that required Christopher's immediate undivided attention. "My stomach," she whispered, her hand splayed dramatically below her ribs. "It's a sharp pain, Chris. It came out of nowhere." Christopher's face was a mask of concern, but his mind was on logistics. Get in, get the best doctor, throw some money around, and get out. This was an inconvenient but manageable interruption. His phone buzzed again. Jessica. He silenced it with a flick of his thumb. He'd call her back later and tell her he was stuck in a last-minute board meeting. It was his go-to excuse, and she never questioned it. Why would she? She was sweet, trusting, simple Jessica. The perfect, stable backdrop for his dynamic life. A team of orderlies approached with a wheelchair, their professionalism a stark contrast to Christopher's manufactured panic. "We need a private suite, the best one you have, and I want to see the chief of medicine immediately," Christopher demanded, already pulling out his platinum credit card as if it were a scepter. The lead orderly, a man with a calm, weathered face, simply nodded. "We'll take care of the patient, sir. Please see the admissions desk inside for the necessary arrangements." Christopher scoffed. Arrangements were for other people. "Just bill whatever it is to this card. Davies. Christopher Davies, CEO of Kronos Innovations. The name should be sufficient." He expected a flicker of recognition, a change in posture, the deference he was so used to. He got none. The orderly focused entirely on settling Brooke into the wheelchair, his movements gentle and practiced. Brooke, for her part, offered a weak smile to Christopher, her eyes fluttering closed. As they wheeled her inside, Christopher followed, his expensive Italian shoes clicking impatiently on the polished marble floor. The lobby was less like a hospital and more like a five-star hotel. A cascading waterfall flowed down a granite wall, the sound a soothing murmur. Abstract art, the kind that cost more than a suburban house, adorned the walls. He strode to the main reception desk, a sweeping curve of polished mahogany. "I'm Christopher Davies," he announced to the receptionist, a poised woman with a headset. "The patient is Brooke Summers. I've requested the chief of medicine and a VIP suite. Please expedite this." The receptionist typed something into her computer, her expression unreadable. "One moment, sir." Christopher tapped his fingers on the desk, his patience wearing thin. He wasn't used to waiting. He wasn't used to being treated like just another person. He looked around, noting the discreet brass plaque near the entrance, the Hartman Medical Center. A common name, he mused. Probably some long-dead philanthropist. It meant nothing to him. His phone buzzed a third time. A text message from Jessica. "Hey, just calling to check in. Hope the meeting is going well. The baby's kicking like a soccer player today. Call me when you can. Love you." A pang of something he refused to identify as guilt pricked at him. He quickly suppressed it. Jessica was fine. She was always fine. She was at home, nesting, doing whatever pregnant women did. She was safe. Brooke, however, needed him. It was a simple, self-serving justification, but it was enough. "Sir," the receptionist said, her voice pulling him back. "Dr. Peterson will be down to speak with you shortly. If you'd like to take a seat." "I don't want to take a seat." He snapped his voice a low growl. "I want a doctor for my friend. Is that so difficult to understand? Or do I need to speak to the person who runs this place and explain how customer service works?" The receptionist remained unnervingly calm. "Dr. Peterson is the chief of medicine, sir. She is the person you requested." Before Christopher could retort, a woman in a crisp white coat approached. She was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and grey-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her name tag read, "Dr. Ann Peterson, Chief of Medicine." "Miss Davies," she said, her voice level and devoid of the awe he expected. "I'm Dr. Peterson. I was told you had some concerns." "Concerns?" Christopher laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "My friend is in severe pain, and we're being held up by bureaucracy. I want her in a room, diagnosed and treated. Now. I'm prepared to pay any price." Dr. Peterson's gaze was steady. "All our patients are treated with the utmost urgency and care, Mr. Davies. Ms. Summers has been taken to an examination room in our emergency wing. A top diagnostician is with her now. We don't expedite care based on credit limits. We do it based on medical need." The polite professional condescension was infuriating. It was a language Christopher wasn't used to hearing. He felt his control, the very foundation of his world, slipping. "Perhaps you don't understand," he said, leaning closer, lowering his voice to an intimidating hiss. "I am a very influential man. A hospital like this relies on donors, on patrons. It would be a shame if a facility with such a fine reputation were to suddenly find itself with a very powerful, very vocal critic." Dr. Peterson didn't even blink. Instead, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her lips. It was the smile of someone who held all the cards and knew it. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential, almost pitying tone. "You seem to be under a number of misapprehensions, but don't worry. I think they are all about to be cleared up." From down the hall, the quiet, rhythmic squeak of orthopedic shoes grew louder. A new figure was approaching. Christopher turned, expecting another doctor or an administrator he could finally intimidate. But the face he saw sent a jolt of ice-cold dread through his entire body. It was Jessica, his pregnant wife. And she wasn't smiling. Jessica moved with a quiet grace that Christopher had always mistaken for meekness. Her pregnancy had softened her features, but today her blue eyes, usually so warm, were as hard and cold as glacial ice. She wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on Dr. Peterson. Anne, Jessica said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the sterile hum of the lobby. Is there a problem here? Christopher's mind raced, trying to compute this impossible scenario. What was Jessica doing here? A checkup, a false alarm with the baby. It had to be a coincidence, a terrible, universe-shattering coincidence. No problem at all, Jessica, Dr. Peterson replied, her tone shifting from professional coolness to one of genuine warmth and respect. Mr. Davies was just expressing his concerns about our hospital's procedures. Jessica's eyes finally settled on Christopher. The look in them was not one of surprise or hurt, not yet. It was a look of profound, weary disappointment. It was the look of someone whose worst suspicions had just been confirmed. My husband, Jessica said, the words perfectly articulated, can be very enthusiastic, especially when he's worried about a friend. The slight pause before the word friend was a scalpel expertly wielded. Christopher felt sweat prickle on his neck. He had to take control of this narrative, and fast. Jess, what are you doing here? I was just... A colleague from work, Brooke Summers. She suddenly collapsed. I had to rush her here. I was about to call you. He stammered the lie, tasting like ash in his mouth. Jessica's expression didn't change. You didn't have to call me Christopher. I was already here. I had my 32-week scan this afternoon. You would have known that if you'd read the text I sent you this morning. The text? He'd glanced at it, registered something about an appointment, and immediately dismissed it as non-urgent. His board meeting had seemed more important. The meeting ran long, sweetheart. It was unavoidable, he said, trying to inject a note of apologetic sincerity into his voice. He reached for her arm, a gesture of ownership and control. She took a small step back, avoiding his touch. The rejection was subtle, but in the silent, charged atmosphere of the lobby, it felt like a gunshot. Dr. Peterson, Jessica said, turning back to the chief of medicine, my husband was demanding a private suite and your personal attention for his colleague. Please make sure Ms. Summers receives the standard excellent level of care we provide to all our patients. No special treatment is necessary or warranted. Dr. Peterson nodded. Of course, Jessica. She then looked at Christopher. If you'll excuse me, I have other patients to attend to. Your friend is in good hands. With a final meaningful look at Jessica, she turned and walked away. The lobby suddenly felt vast and empty. The receptionist was studiously ignoring them. The waterfall seemed to mock him with its serene indifference. Christopher was left alone with his wife, and for the first time in their marriage, he felt utterly powerless. Jess, let me explain. He began, his voice dropping. Explain what? She asked, her tone dangerously quiet. Explain why your colleague is a 25-year-old aspiring model who you've been having lunches with for the past 6 months. Lunches that, according to your credit card statements, have been happening at boutique hotels. Or should we talk about the jewelry from Cartier that you bought last month? A corporate gift, I believe you called it. Christopher was stunned into silence. He had been so arrogant, so sure of his own cleverness, so dismissive of her intelligence. He saw her as the gentle, unassuming wife who managed their home and social calendar. He never imagined she was paying attention. He never imagined she was capable of this cold, analytical dissection of his deceit. How did you know? He whispered. A humorless smile touched Jessica's lips. You're not a careful man, Christopher. You're a careless one. You think because I don't run a tech company that I don't understand how the world works. That was your first mistake. She gestured vaguely at the opulent surroundings. My family has been in the business of managing complex systems for a very long time." The way she said it sent a chill down his spine. Her family. The Hartmans. He'd met her parents a few times before they passed away. He remembered them as quiet old money types. Her father, Robert Hartman, had been a retired investor who, in Christopher's opinion, lacked any real killer instinct. Her mother had been a society woman, dedicated to charity. He had patronized them, seeing them as relics of a bygone era. He saw their wealth as old and stagnant, nothing like the dynamic, disruptive fortune he was building. He looked from Jessica's face to the brass plaque on the wall. The Hartman Medical Center. The name wasn't a coincidence. His mind was struggling to connect the dots. The name on the building, the deference Dr. Peterson showed Jessica, the way she had spoken of her family. It was like watching a puzzle assemble itself, and the final picture was one he couldn't comprehend. "Hartman," he said aloud, the name feeling foreign and heavy on his tongue. "This place, it's named after my father," Jessica finished for him, her voice flat. "He founded it 30 years ago. He and my grandfather built this entire medical foundation from the ground up." The foundation of Christopher's world didn't just crack, it shattered. He had married Jessica Hartman, seeing her as a pretty well-bred accessory to his life. He knew she had a trust fund, a comfortable inheritance he'd always mentally categorized as her little nest egg. He had no idea. He had been living in a palace thinking it was a cottage, and had never once bothered to look up at the ceiling. Your family owns this hospital," he stammered, the question sounding absurd even to his own ears. Jessica's gaze hardened. "Christopher, my family doesn't just own the hospital. We own the building, the land it's on, the pharmaceutical research lab in the West Wing, the medical supply company that stocks it, and the charitable foundation that oversees it all." She paused, letting the weight of her words land with the force of a physical blow. "I don't just have a nest egg. I am the chairman of the board. And you," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than any scream, "just brought your mistress to my hospital." The words hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from Christopher's lungs. Chairman of the board. The title seemed alien, impossible when applied to his wife. Jessica was the woman who organized dinner parties, who reminded him to call his mother, who was carrying his child. She was not a titan of industry. She couldn't be. His entire perception of their life together tilted on its axis. The quiet dinners with her parents, which he had endured with smug condescension, suddenly replayed in his mind. He remembered her father, Robert, speaking softly about endowment management and biotech portfolios. Christopher had dismissed it as the ramblings of a hobbyist. He now realized he had been a child, listening to giants discuss the creation of worlds. That's not possible," he managed to say, the denial a reflex. You handle charity balls, not board meetings. And you thought those charity balls, which raise 8 figures in a single night, just organize themselves?" Jessica countered, her voice sharp. "You saw what you wanted to see, Chris. A docile domestic wife who wouldn't ask too many questions. It was a convenient fantasy for you, and I allowed you to have it. That was my mistake." He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. The simple, elegant dress she wore probably cost more than his suit. The quiet confidence he'd mistaken for passivity was actually the profound stillness of immense power. She hadn't needed his flashy world of venture capital and hostile takeovers. She had been living in a world of her own, one so far above his, he hadn't even been able to perceive it. "Why?" he asked, the question laced with a pathetic bewilderment. "Why wouldn't you tell me the extent of it?" "Tell you?" she asked, a genuine, bitter laugh escaping her lips. "I tried in the beginning. Do you remember when I tried to talk to you about the Hartman Foundation's new investment in robotic surgery? You patted my hand and said, "That's nice, honey," before spending the next hour boasting about a new app your company had acquired. You never asked a single follow-up question. You never showed a shred of genuine interest in my life, my family, or my legacy. You only ever saw me as a reflection of yourself. Every word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of his arrogance. He had been so blind, so wrapped up in his own self-importance. He thought he was the sun, and she was a minor planet caught in his orbit. The reality was that he had been a small moon orbiting a star he didn't even know was there. His phone buzzed. He instinctively glanced down. It was a notification from his bank. He ignored it. "So this is it," he said, trying to find some footing, some way to regain control. "You bring me to your kingdom to humiliate me." "Don't flatter yourself, Christopher. My day does not revolve around you," she said coldly. "As I told you, I had a doctor's appointment. You chose to bring your affair to my front door. This humiliation is entirely of your own making." As if on cue, a large, imposing man in a dark suit materialized beside them. He was built like a former linebacker, with a calm, watchful presence. He nodded respectfully at Jessica. "Mr. Henderson," she greeted him. "Is there an update? Ms. Summers has been diagnosed with mild dehydration and acute anxiety," the man Henderson reported in a low, rumbling voice. "Dr. Matthews has recommended she be given IV fluids and discharged within the hour." Mild dehydration. The entire dramatic life-or-death emergency that had ripped his afternoon apart was nothing more than a case of a young woman needing a glass of water. The absurdity of it all was a fresh wave of humiliation. "And her bill?" Jessica asked. "As per your instructions, it will be sent to Mr. Davies's personal account, not his corporate one," Henderson confirmed. Jessica nodded. "Thank you, Robert. Could you please escort my husband to the cafeteria? I believe he and I have a few more things to discuss, and I'd prefer a more private setting." "Of course, Mrs. Davies." Henderson turned his impassive gaze on Christopher. "Sir, if you'll come with me." It wasn't a request. Christopher looked from the mountain of a man to his wife. The power dynamic had shifted so completely it gave him vertigo. He was no longer a CEO in control. He was a misbehaving child being sent to the principal's office. He had no choice but to follow. The hospital cafeteria was as elegant as the rest of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a manicured garden. But Jessica didn't lead him to one of the comfortable booths. She guided him to a stark, functional table in a secluded corner under the unflattering glare of a fluorescent light. Henderson stood at a discreet but unmissable distance. Jessica sat down, placing her hands on her swollen belly in a protective gesture. She slid a sleek, dark blue folder across the table. "I had hoped to have this conversation under different circumstances," she began, her voice devoid of its earlier anger, replaced now by a chilling, businesslike tone. "I was hoping we could discuss this at home after the baby was born, but you've forced my hand." Christopher stared at the folder. He didn't want to open it. He knew that whatever was inside would be the final definitive end of the life he knew. "Jess, please." He tried, his voice hoarse. "We can fix this. I made a mistake. A horrible, stupid mistake. But we have a baby coming. Our family. Our family." She cut him off, her voice dangerously soft. "The family you were betraying while I was at home carrying your son. The family you neglected so you could play benefactor to a woman suffering from anxiety." She pushed the folder closer to him. "Open it, Christopher." With trembling hands, he opened the folder. The first page was a document from a forensic accounting firm. It was a detailed analysis of the finances of Kronos Innovations, his company. His pride and joy. His eyes scanned the columns of numbers, the highlighted transactions, the damning summaries. He felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't just about his affair. This was about everything. The seed money for Kronos. Jessica said, her voice a clinical narration of his doom. You told me you secured it from a consortium of angel investors in Silicon Valley. A brilliant pitch, you said. They were begging to get in on the ground floor. He looked up at her, his heart pounding in his chest. But there were no angel investors, were there, Chris? She continued. The initial $5 million, the money that started it all, was funneled from one of my family's legacy trust accounts, an account you gained access to when we consolidated our finances after our wedding, an account you must have thought was just some forgotten pot of money. He couldn't speak. She knew. She knew his darkest, most foundational secret. He wasn't a self-made man. He was a thief. You didn't build an empire, Christopher, she said, her voice sealing his fate. You stole the foundation of one and built a shack on it, and the rent is now due. The sterile air of the cafeteria felt thick, heavy, and suffocating. Christopher stared at the forensic accounting report, but the numbers blurred into meaningless symbols. The only thing he could see clearly was the abyss that had opened up beneath him. The affair was a symptom. This was the disease. His entire success story, the narrative he had built his identity around, was a fraud. How could you do this? He whispered the question ludicrously aimed at her, as if she were the perpetrator. Spying on me. Hiring accountants. You call it spying. I call it due diligence. Jessica retorted, her composure absolute. Did you really think I wouldn't keep an eye on the family trusts my father taught me to read a balance sheet before I learned to ride a bicycle? The discrepancies started small about 18 months ago. A few $100,000 here, a $500,000 there. You were clever routing it through shell corporations. You probably thought it was an insignificant amount, lost in the noise of multi-billion-dollar portfolios. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. But it was a pattern, and it was my money. So I hired the best forensic accountants in the country. Not to spy on my husband, but to protect my family's assets from a potential threat. It turns out the threat was sleeping in my bed. He felt a desperate, primal urge to defend himself, to twist the narrative. I was going to pay it back. With interest. The company is a huge success. The valuation is through the roof. It was an investment. I used that money to build something incredible for us. For us. Jessica's laugh was sharp and brittle. Was the penthouse apartment you leased on the other side of town for us? Was the Porsche you bought Brooke for her birthday for us? Was this entire secret life you built on my family's money? For us. She gestured to the folder. It's all in there, Christopher. Every wire transfer, every gift, every hotel bill. They didn't just find the embezzlement from the trust. They found how you used it. You've been living a lie, and I've been funding it. Suddenly, the phone he'd placed on the table buzzed again, this time with a series of frantic notifications. He glanced down. Emails from his chief financial officer. Text messages from his bank. Urgent corporate accounts frozen. Credit card transaction denied. Amount $2,500. Merchant Cartier. Notice. Access to Kronos. Innovations. Primary operating accounts has been suspended, pending an internal investigation. He looked up at Jessica, utter disbelief warring with dawning horror. "What did you do?" "I protected my assets," she said simply. The forensic report was presented to the board of the Hartman Foundation this morning. Given that the foundation holds a significant and until now silent partnership in Kronos Innovations, a little detail you must have missed in the fine print of the initial funding you stole, they voted to launch an immediate investigation into financial mismanagement. As the majority stakeholder, I had the authority to freeze the accounts to prevent further misappropriation of funds. Your CFO was notified 10 minutes ago. He had been checkmated in a game he never even knew he was playing. While he was racing his mistress to the hospital, his empire was being dismantled brick by the woman he had so fatally underestimated. "You can't do that," he said the words weak and powerless. "It's my company." "Is it?" she countered. "Is a house built with stolen materials truly owned by the thief? According to my lawyers, it's a very grey area. And Christopher," she added, her voice dropping, "my lawyers are much, much better than yours." As if summoned, another man approached the table. He was sharp and impeccably dressed, carrying a slim leather briefcase. This was David Chen, the Hartman family's lead counsel, a man known in legal circles as a shark who never lost. "Jessica," David said with a respectful nod, before turning his cool, assessing gaze on Christopher. "Mr. Davies." "David, thank you for coming," Jessica said. "I believe you have some documents for my husband." David Chen placed his briefcase on the table and opened it with 2 precise clicks. He pulled out a thick sheaf of papers and placed it squarely in front of Christopher on top of the accounting report. "Mr. Davies." The lawyer began, his tone formal and devoid of any emotion. "These are divorce papers. They cite infidelity and financial fraud as the primary grounds. All shared assets which, upon review, appear to have been purchased with funds originating from Mrs. Davies's inheritance or trusts have been frozen by court order. This includes your homes, your vehicles, and your personal investment portfolios." He slid another document forward. "This is a restraining order. You are to remain at least 500 feet away from Mrs. Davies and all her properties, including your marital home, effective immediately." Christopher's world narrowed to the stack of paper in front of him. Divorce, frozen assets, restraining order. Each word was a nail. "The marital home. You're kicking me out of my own house," he choked out. "The house was purchased by the Hartman Trust as a wedding gift for me, Christopher. Your name was never on the deed. You were a guest," Jessica said softly. "The party is over." He felt a surge of useless rage. "You'll regret this, Jessica. I'll fight you. I'll take you for everything you've got. I'll tell the world what you are." David Chen spoke before Jessica could. "I wouldn't advise that, Mr. Davies. Any attempt to slander Mrs. Davies would be met with a defamation lawsuit of a magnitude you can no longer afford to fight. Furthermore, we have not yet filed the criminal complaint for embezzlement. My client has been gracious enough to hold off on that for now. For the sake of her unborn child, she would prefer to handle this civilly. But if you choose to make this difficult—" He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "Her graciousness has its limits, and a federal prosecutor would be very interested in this forensic report." Prison. The word wasn't spoken, but it echoed in the space between them. Christopher looked at Jessica, the mother of his child, and saw a stranger. A woman with the power to not only ruin him, but to utterly erase him. His bravado crumbled, replaced by a desperate, pathetic plea. "Jess, don't do this. Think of the baby." "I am thinking of him," she replied, her voice finally cracking with a sliver of raw emotion. "I am ensuring he is born into a life of honesty and integrity. I am protecting him from a father who is a liar, a cheat, and a thief. He will know his grandfather's legacy, not his father's shame." She stood up, her movement slow and deliberate. "Robert will show you out," she said, gesturing to Mr. Henderson, who had remained a silent statue nearby. "Your personal effects from the house will be sent to an address of your lawyer's choosing. Do not try to contact me again. All communication will go through David." She turned and walked away without a backward glance, leaving Christopher sitting alone at the table with the ruins of his life laid out on paper. He was no longer Christopher Davies, the tech mogul. He was just a man in a hospital cafeteria, stripped of everything. Realizing he had not only lost a fortune, but he had lost a queen he never even knew he had. The walk out of the Hartman Medical Center was the longest walk of Christopher's life. Mr. Henderson shadowed him, a silent, immovable presence that ensured there would be no scenes, no outbursts. People in the lobby, the same people who would have once vied for his attention, now glanced at him with curiosity, their eyes lingering on his pale face and the formidable man escorting him. He was no longer a VIP. He was a problem being managed. When he reached the entrance, his Aston Martin was gone from its imperious spot in the fire lane. A valet, a different one from before, approached him, holding a single key. "Your vehicle has been moved to the long-term parking garage level P4, sir," the young man said politely. "The charges have been handled. Just like everything else." He snatched the key and stalked towards the parking garage, the humiliation burning in his gut. Inside the concrete structure, he found his car parked neatly between the lines, looking suddenly less like a symbol of power and more like a gaudy, useless toy. He slumped into the driver's seat, the smell of expensive leather now nauseating. He tried his phone. He called his CFO, Mark. It went straight to voicemail. He called the head of his legal department. Voicemail. He called his personal banker. A polite but firm assistant informed him that all his accounts were under a temporary hold, and she couldn't provide any more information. The wall was absolute. Jessica had built it, and it was impenetrable. He sat in the silence of his car for what felt like an hour, his mind a maelstrom of rage and disbelief. He had been so thoroughly and systematically dismantled. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act of revenge. This was a long-planned, meticulously executed strategy. Jessica, his quiet, unassuming wife, had been watching him gathering evidence and laying the groundwork for his destruction for months. The affair hadn't been the cause. It had merely been the trigger. The thought sent a fresh wave of cold dread through him. She hadn't just reacted to his infidelity. She had been preparing for his betrayal on a fundamental level long before Brooke was ever in the picture. She had known what he was. His thoughts turned to Brooke. What was he going to do about her? He had brought her here promising to take care of her. Now he couldn't even afford to pay for her IV drip. He pulled up her contact, his thumb hovering over the call button. What would he even say? "Sorry, darling, the billionaire you've been seeing is a fraud whose wife just cut him off completely. Good luck with the dehydration." Before he could decide, a call came through. It was Brooke. "Chris, where are you?" Her voice was shaky, but the dramatic weakness was gone, replaced by an edge of anxiety. "They're discharging me." They handed me a bill. An actual bill. Can you believe it? They said I had to sort it out with admissions, and some huge guy in a suit told me I needed to leave the premises immediately. What is going on? Christopher closed his eyes. The small, manageable drama he had walked in with had been swallowed by a cataclysm. "I'm in the parking garage, Brooke. There's been a complication," he said, his voice flat. "A complication? What does that mean? Is this about that woman I saw you with? The pregnant one? Was that your wife?" The questions came in a rush, laced with accusation. She was no longer the damsel in distress. She was a co-conspirator whose getaway driver had just been arrested. "Yes, that was my wife." He admitted the words, feeling like gravel in his throat. "And what happened? Did she make a scene? Are you okay?" "She didn't make a scene, Brooke. She made a phone call," he said bitterly. "It turns out she owns the hospital and the bank that holds my company's accounts. And as of about an hour ago, she owns my entire life." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. He could almost hear the frantic calculations happening in her head as she processed this new world-altering information. What, you're kidding, right? This is some kind of sick joke." "I wish it were," he said, the exhaustion hitting him like a physical weight. "My accounts are frozen. The company is in lockdown. I've been served with divorce papers. I'm locked out of my own house." "Your house? But what about my things?" She asked the question so purely self-interested, it was almost comical. "I left my new Dior handbag in the foyer." Christopher almost laughed. A handbag. He was facing financial ruin, public disgrace, and possible jail time, and she was worried about a handbag. In that moment, he saw Brooke for exactly what she was, a beautiful, shallow opportunist who had attached herself to his wealth, just as Jessica had said. "I don't think you'll be getting it back, Brooke," he said wearily. "Listen, I can't do this right now. I have to figure things out." "Figure things out? What about me, Chris?" Her voice rose, becoming shrill. "You made me promises. You said you were leaving her. You said you were going to take care of me." "Promises I can no longer keep." He snapped, his patience gone. "The man you thought I was doesn't exist anymore. You're on your own." He hung up the phone before she could reply, tossing it onto the passenger seat. The silence that followed was absolute. He had no one to call, no one to help him. His business partners would scatter the moment the news of the fraud investigation broke. His friends were social climbers who would drop him the second his name was tainted. He was an island, and the tide was coming in. He finally started the car, the powerful engine roaring to life. But he had nowhere to go. He couldn't go home. He couldn't go to his office. He couldn't even check into a hotel, not with his credit cards frozen. He drove aimlessly out of the garage and into the late afternoon traffic. The city, his city, a place he had once commanded from penthouse boardrooms and exclusive clubs, now felt alien and hostile. Every gleaming skyscraper seemed to mock him, a testament to a world he was no longer a part of. He was a ghost haunting the streets of his former life. News alerts began to pop up on his car's display screen. Kronos Innovations halts trading pending internal review. CEO Christopher Davies under investigation for financial misconduct. The ripple effect was becoming a tidal wave. Jessica hadn't just exposed him. She had launched a surgical strike designed for maximum immediate impact. The business world moved at the speed of information, and his reputation was already being shredded. He pulled over to the side of a busy street, overwhelmed. He thought back to that morning. He had woken up a king. He had put on a $1,000 suit, drunk his custom-blended coffee, and looked at his reflection, seeing a master of the universe. Now he was nothing. A man with a fancy car, he probably wouldn't be able to afford gas for by next week. It was a fall so swift, so total, that his mind could barely grasp it. And the architect of it all was the one person he had never, not for a single second, considered a threat. The quiet woman carrying his child. Brooke Summers stood outside the imposing glass doors of the Hartman Medical Center, her thin silk blouse offering little protection against the sudden chill of the evening breeze. The bill from the emergency room was clutched in her hand, a crisp, mocking piece of paper detailing the exorbitant cost of IV fluids and a doctor's 5-minute consultation. Her phone was silent. Christopher hadn't answered her last 3 frantic calls. Her carefully constructed world, built on promises whispered over champagne and backed by the solid weight of Christopher's black card, was dissolving like sugar in the rain. She had seen herself as the heroine of a romance novel, the beautiful young woman who captures the heart of a powerful, trapped man and helps him escape his dreary, passionless marriage. She had imagined a future of sun-drenched villas, front-row seats at Fashion Week, and the envious glances of her peers. The woman she had seen in the lobby, Jessica, had shattered that fantasy. There was nothing dreary or passionless about her. Brooke had seen the steel in her eyes, the effortless authority in her posture. That wasn't the neglected wife from Christopher's stories. That was a queen surveying her domain. And Brooke, in her flimsy designer dress and feigned illness, had been nothing more than a court jester making a fool of herself. A taxi pulled up to the curb. She got in, giving the driver the address to the downtown penthouse Christopher had leased for their trysts. It was her only sanctuary, the only place filled with things he had bought her. Perhaps he would go there. Perhaps this was all a terrible, elaborate misunderstanding. But when the taxi arrived, her keycard flashed red. Access denied. She tried again. A cold knot of panic tightened in her stomach. She called the building's concierge, a man who had always greeted her with a fawning smile. "I'm sorry, Ms. Summers," he said, his voice now clipped and professional. "We received a notification from the leaseholder this afternoon. Your access has been revoked effective immediately." "But my things are up there," she protested, her voice rising. "My clothes, my jewelry. Arrangements will be made to have your personal belongings packed and sent to you. We will need a forwarding address," he said coolly. And then the line went dead. She was locked out, stripped of her access as cleanly and efficiently as Christopher had been. This wasn't just Jessica's anger. This was a scorched earth campaign. Defeated Brooke slumped against the cold marble wall of the building's exterior. The life she had been living for the past 6 months was an illusion. She hadn't been Christopher's partner. She had been a line item on an expense report, a luxury he had purchased with stolen funds. And now that the funds were gone, so was she. She thought about the other women in her circle, the ones who dated wealthy, powerful men. They had always warned her. "Get it in writing," they'd say. "Make sure you have your own account." She had laughed at them, convinced that her connection with Chris was different. It was real. He loved her. He was just waiting for the right time to leave his wife. How naive she had been. She had been so captivated by the performance of wealth and power that she never bothered to look behind the curtain. She had taken his stories about his simple wife at face value because it fit the narrative she wanted. She had been a willing audience for his lies. Her phone buzzed. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought it was Chris. But it was a notification from a gossip blog, the kind she followed religiously. The headline was a dagger. Tech CEO Christopher Davies' empire crumbles amidst allegations of massive fraud. Wife philanthropist Jessica Hartman files for divorce. The story was already out. It was brief but brutal. It mentioned Kronos Innovations' frozen accounts, the sudden investigation, and the divorce filing. It painted Christopher as a charlatan, and Jessica as a quiet powerhouse, the unsuspecting heiress to the Hartman fortune who had finally uncovered her husband's deceit. Brooke's name wasn't mentioned, but she knew it was only a matter of time. She was the loose thread in the story, the other woman. The paparazzi would find her. Her face would be splashed across tabloids, not as a rising star, but as a home-wrecking gold digger. The scandal would cling to her like tar poisoning any chance she had of a legitimate acting career. She hadn't just lost a benefactor, she had lost her future. A wave of bitter resentment washed over her. Resentment towards Christopher for his lies and his weakness. Resentment towards Jessica for her power and her perfectly executed revenge. But underneath it all, a small, hard kernel of resentment was reserved for herself. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. Or in this case, she had been thrown out of it and locked out of the building. With no other options, she called the one person she knew she could always count on, the person she had been avoiding for months, because her life had seemed too small and too ordinary. Her sister. "Hey, Katie," she said, trying to keep her voice from breaking, when her sister answered. "Yeah, it's me. Listen, I know it's last minute, but can I come and stay with you for a few days? It's a long story." As she hailed another taxi this time to take her to a modest apartment in the suburbs, Brooke Summers finally understood. In the high-stakes game between Christopher and Jessica, she had never been a player. She was just part of the collateral damage. For the next 48 hours, Christopher Davies existed in a state of suspended animation. He found a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city that still accepted cash, a relic of a bygone era. The room smelled of stale smoke and despair. He, a man who had once complained if his hotel suite didn't have a view of the park, now stared at a peeling wallpaper landscape of a faded beach. His phone was a relentless torrent of bad news. His story was the lead on every financial news network. Pundits who had once lauded him as a visionary now picked apart his career, recasting him as a reckless gambler and a fraud. Former colleagues and so-called friends released statements distancing themselves from him and Kronos Innovations. He was radioactive. He finally managed to get a lawyer on the phone, a harried public defender his old legal team had recommended in a terse 2-sentence email. The man, an overworked but decent lawyer named Ben Carter, laid out the grim reality. "The evidence the Hartman legal team has is overwhelming, Mr. Davies," Ben said, his voice tinny over the phone. "The paper trail for the embezzlement is pristine. They have you dead to rights on the civil fraud. Your only saving grace right now is that Mrs. Davies hasn't pressed criminal charges. My advice, don't provoke her. So I just roll over. Let her take everything," Christopher demanded, pacing the threadbare carpet of his motel room. "Frankly, sir, there's nothing left to take. It was never yours to begin with," Ben stated bluntly. "The company was built with her money. The house is hers. The cars were purchased from accounts funded by her trust. We can fight to get you some personal effects, maybe a severance from the company you technically founded, but it will be pennies on the dollar. They are in a position of absolute strength." Absolute strength. The phrase echoed in his mind. He thought of Jessica, of her calm, unyielding face in the cafeteria. He had mistaken her gentleness for weakness, her kindness for naivete. He now understood that her gentleness was a choice, a luxury afforded to her by a foundation of unshakable power. He had been the weak one all along, propped up by her resources, blinded by his own ego. On the third day, a courier delivered a box to his motel room. It contained a few of his old suits, some books, and a small framed photo from the early days of their marriage. In the photo, he and Jessica were laughing on a beach, young and full of hope. He looked at the man in the picture, the man with the genuine smile, and felt like he was looking at a complete stranger. When had he lost that person? When had the ambition curdled into greed? The confidence into arrogance? Tucked inside the box was a simple, handwritten note on plain stationery. Christopher, this is the last time you will hear from me directly. Enclosed are the final divorce papers. Sign them. If you sign them without a fight, the criminal charges will not be pursued. You will be left with the small personal savings account you had before we were married, which amounts to roughly $70,000. That is all. Consider it a final act of mercy, not for you, but for the child who will one day have to know you are his father. Do not try to see the baby after he is born. David will arrange supervised visitation in a neutral location when and if I deem it appropriate. This is not negotiable. Jessica. $70,000. To the man he had been a week ago, it was a bar tab. Now it was his entire world. The note was not cruel. It was clinical. It was the final closing of a deal, the termination of a bad investment. She had excised him from her life with the precision of a surgeon. He sat on the lumpy bed, the divorce papers in his hand, and he finally, truly understood. This wasn't about the affair. The affair was just the final ugly symptom of his betrayal. He had betrayed her trust, her family's legacy, and the very foundation of their marriage. He had taken her quiet, steadfast love and used it as a cover for his own insecurities and greed. There was no fight left in him. The rage was gone, replaced by a hollow, aching emptiness. He had built his life into a magnificent tower, but he had done it on sand. And the tide had come in. He picked up the cheap pen from the motel desk, its plastic casing feeling flimsy and foreign in his hand. He flattened the papers on the stained nightstand, and with a trembling hand signed his name. He signed away his company, his home, his fortune, and his family. He signed away Christopher Davies, the tech mogul. When he was done, all that was left was Chris. A man in a cheap motel room with $70,000 and a lifetime of regret stretching out before him. The stripping of the king was complete. He was left with nothing but himself, and it was a self he no longer recognized. 6 months later, Jessica Hartman stood at her office window, her infant son Robert sleeping peacefully in a bassinet nearby. The world outside was painted in the crisp colors of autumn, a season of change that mirrored her own. She was no longer the wife of a CEO. She was the formidable chairman of the Hartman Foundation, a leader in her own right. The scandal had settled. Kronos Innovations. The hollow monument to Christopher's ego was absorbed and rebranded. As Hartman Future Technologies, it was now a powerful arm of the foundation, its purpose redirected from flashy apps to meaningful medical innovation. The empire built on a lie had been remade into a legacy of substance. News of Christopher was a whisper. He had taken the pittance she had left him and disappeared into a life of anonymity in a small Midwestern town. He signed the divorce papers without a fight, and out of shame or cowardice, had not once asked to see his son. He was a ghost erased from the life he had tried to corrupt. Dr. Ann Peterson knocked gently before entering, her eyes warm. "The new pediatric wing is officially opening next week," she said with a smile. The dedication plaque looks wonderful. Jessica looked from her friend to her son, a profound sense of peace settling over her. She had faced betrayal and had not just endured. She had built something better from the ruins. She had protected her family, her child, and her legacy. The storm was over, and in the quiet aftermath, Jessica Hartman, mother and leader, was finally truly home. What a story of deceit, hidden power, and ultimate justice. Jessica's journey shows us that true strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet, observant force that changes the world. Christopher's spectacular downfall is a powerful reminder that a life built on lies is a house of cards ready to collapse at the slightest breeze. He didn't just lose his money, he lost the one person who was his greatest asset, and he never even knew it. What do you think about Jessica's actions? Was her response perfectly calculated justice, or was it a cold, brutal revenge? Could Christopher ever redeem himself? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of hidden strength and shocking revelations, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a good story. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next real-life drama. Thank you for listening. The soft hiss of a zipper cutting through the midnight silence of a $30 million Tribeca penthouse was the only sound Gideon Roth made. He moved like a ghost in his own home, past the Murano glass sculptures and the Jean-Michel Basquiat painting that hung in the foyer. In the master bedroom, illuminated only by the cold blue glow of the city, outside his wife Naomi slept, her body curled around the precious new life growing within her. Their son was the picture of peaceful trust, a trust Gideon was about to detonate. He wouldn't even leave a note. Notes were for sentimental fools. He was leaving a life behind, and by morning, the only evidence of his departure would be the empty space beside his sleeping, pregnant wife. The air in the penthouse was chilled to a precise 68 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature Gideon insisted upon for optimal sleep. Tonight, however, the cold felt different. It was the sterile, unforgiving cold of a decision made. Gideon Roth, CEO of Nexus Capital, and a man whose face had graced the cover of Forbes under the headline, "The Digital Midas," was performing the final, quietest act of a meticulously planned betrayal. His bag, a sleek leather weekender from Bottega Veneta, was already packed. It sat by the door of his cavernous walk-in closet, filled not with the bespoke Brioni suits he wore to command boardrooms, but with the casual, expensive linens of a man disappearing to paradise. A Patek Philippe watch with a dual time zone function, a gift from Naomi for their 3rd anniversary, was already strapped to his wrist. One time zone was set to New York. The other was already set for the Leeward Islands. He paused at the bedroom door, his hand hovering over the cool brass handle. A flicker of something guilt, perhaps, or a vestige of the man he used to be made him look back. Naomi shifted in her sleep, a soft murmur escaping her lips. Her hand rested protectively on the swell of her belly, now 7 months along. They had been ecstatic at the ultrasound just last week, watching the tiny, thrumming heartbeat of their son. They'd already named him Leo. Gideon had held her hand, his eyes misty, and sworn he'd never felt a love so profound. It was a flawless performance. The memory should have paralyzed him. Instead, it was gasoline on the fire of his desperation. That life, the one of impending fatherhood, of PTA meetings and suburban obligations, felt like a gilded cage closing in on him. Naomi, with her gentle strength, her unwavering belief in him, her perfect pedigree and social grace, had become the beautiful, unknowing warden. He felt suffocated by the sheer, unblemished goodness of it all. He craved chaos. He craved the thrilling, selfish pulse of a life lived for no one but himself. And that pulse had a name, Kendra Lowell. His phone buzzed silently in his pocket, a single vibration he had programmed just for her. Wheels up in 45. The driver is at the corner of Greenwich and Nan Moore. Kendra. She was everything Naomi was not. Ambitious, sharp-edged, and utterly unsentimental. A PR executive from a rival firm, she had met Gideon at a tech gala 6 months ago. Their affair had started with clandestine lunches at forgotten downtown bistros and escalated to stolen weekends in the Hamptons while Naomi visited her parents in Connecticut. With Kendra, he wasn't a future father or a husband. He was just Gideon, a powerful, desired man. She didn't want a family. She wanted the world, and she saw him as the rocket to get her there. He knew it, and he didn't care. Her ambition was a mirror to his own. He pulled the bedroom door shut with an almost imperceptible click. In the hallway, the sterile silence of the apartment seemed to judge him. Every piece of art, every custom-designed piece of furniture was a testament to the life he and Naomi had built. A life he was now throwing away like a losing stock. He slipped on his driving loafers, grabbed the bag, and walked towards the private elevator that opened directly into his apartment. As he pressed the button, his reflection stared back at him from the polished bronze doors, a handsome man in his late 30s, his dark hair perfectly styled. Even at this hour, his jaw set. He looked like a man in complete control, but inside his heart, hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and exhilaration. The elevator descended a smooth, silent drop from his life in the sky to the waiting escape on the street. He stepped out into the pre-dawn chill of Manhattan. A black Cadillac Escalade was idling exactly where Kendra said it would be. The driver, a discreet professional from a private service he didn't recognize, stepped out and took his bag without a word. Gideon slid into the plush leather interior. The city lights blurred as the car pulled away from the curb. He didn't look back at the monolithic glass tower, where his pregnant wife slept, dreaming, he presumed, of the perfect life they shared. He couldn't afford to. He took out his phone and typed a single message to Kendra. "On my way. Burn the ships." Her reply was instantaneous. "The fires are already lit, baby." A slow smile spread across Gideon's face. It was done. He was free. Or so he thought. The Gulfstream GC650 cut through the stratosphere, a silver needle stitching a path from the cold reality of New York to the fantasy of St. Bart's. Inside the world was champagne and soft leather. Kendra Lowell was draped across the seat opposite Gideon, her long, tanned legs propped up on the edge of his. She was wearing a silk jumpsuit that shimmered under the cabin's soft lighting, and her laughter was as bright and bubbly as the Dom Perignon in her flute. "To us," she said, raising her glass. "To new beginnings, and to never having to check into a hotel under the name Mr. Smith again." Gideon clinked his glass against hers. "To St. Bart's." He watched her as she sipped her champagne, her eyes sparkling with triumph. Kendra was beautiful, undeniably so, but her allure was more than just physical. It was her razor-sharp ambition, the way she looked at the world as a series of objectives to be conquered. She had conquered him, and it was a surrender he had welcomed. "Did you—" she began, her voice dropping slightly, the only hint of vulnerability she ever showed. "She was asleep," Gideon said, cutting her off. He didn't want to talk about Naomi. He didn't want to picture her waking up reaching for him and finding only cold sheets. She won't know anything until morning. By then we'll be having breakfast overlooking the Caribbean." Kendra's smile returned brighter than before. "Good, no loose ends. My boss at Edelman is going to have a conniption when he gets my resignation email. But then again, dating the CEO of Nexus Capital is a bit of a conflict of interest. Wouldn't you say?" "Ex-CEO soon enough," Gideon mused, swirling the scotch in his tumbler. That was part of the plan. He had already set in motion his sabbatical. He would step down citing personal reasons and burnout, handing the reins to his competent but uninspired COO Robert. He had liquidated a significant portion of his personal stock portfolio over the past few months, funneling the money into untraceable offshore accounts. He had built an empire, and now he was walking away with a king's ransom. The flight passed in a haze of alcohol and intoxicating plans for the future. They talked about buying a villa in Monaco, a yacht to sail the Greek islands, attending the Cannes Film Festival, not as guests, but as power players. It was a fantasy woven from money and ego, and for Gideon, it was the perfect antidote to the quiet domestic life that had begun to feel like a death sentence. They landed at Gustav III Airport, the notoriously short runway, a thrilling welcome to the island. A private concierge met them on the tarmac, whisking them through customs and into a waiting Range Rover. The villa was a modernist masterpiece carved into the cliffs of Gouverneur, with an infinity pool that seemed to spill directly into the turquoise sea. "It's perfect," Kendra breathed. Walking through the open-plan living area and out onto the sprawling terrace. "I had it booked for weeks," Gideon said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. He inhaled the scent of her perfume, a heady mix of tuberose and ambition. This was real. The weight of his other life was an ocean away. The first 24 hours were idyllic. They swam in the pool, drank rosé on the sun-drenched terrace, and made love with a desperate energy, as if to physically erase any lingering trace of his past. Gideon felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. He didn't check his New York phone, which he had powered down and tucked into the bottom of his suitcase. He was off the grid. He was a new man. The first crack in the perfect facade appeared the next afternoon. He was lounging by the pool while Kendra was on a video call with her lawyer, finalizing the details of her wrongful termination suit against her old firm, a golden parachute she'd engineered with Gideon's help. His burner phone, a simple prepaid device for emergencies, buzzed on the table beside him. It was a number he didn't recognize, but the New York area code sent a jolt of anxiety through him. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. On the fourth call, he answered, his voice clipped. "Hello. Is this Gideon Roth?" The voice was professional female and unfamiliar. "Who is this?" "My name is Dr. Lena Hansen. I'm Naomi Roth's obstetrician. I'm calling because we had her 30-week scan scheduled for this morning and she missed the appointment. We've been unable to reach her on her cell or the home phone. Given the circumstances, we thought it best to try her emergency contacts." Gideon's blood ran cold. "The circumstances? What circumstances?" "It was a high-risk appointment, Mr. Roth. We noted a slight arrhythmia in the baby's heartbeat last week and wanted to monitor it closely. It's likely nothing, but we never advise missing these scans. Is Naomi with you?" "Is she all right?" The world tilted on its axis. An arrhythmia. Naomi had told him the doctor said everything was perfect. Had she been protecting him from worry? Or had she simply not wanted to burden him? The image of her alone in that vast apartment, possibly worried or unwell, pierced through his bubble of selfish bliss. The baby. Leo, his son. I'm not with her, he stammered. "I'm traveling for work." The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. "I'll try and reach her right away." He hung up his hand, trembling. He tried Naomi's number from his burner phone. It went straight to voicemail. Her inbox was full. He tried the landline. It rang and rang until the automated operator took over. Panic began to claw at his throat. What if something was wrong? What if she'd woken up? Realized he was gone, and the shock had sent her into premature labor. What if she was hurt alone, unable to call for help? Kendra finished her call and sauntered over, stretching languidly like a cat. "Good news. They're settling." "Who was that?" "Wrong number." Gideon lied, his mind racing. The paradise he had built was suddenly a prison. The sun felt too hot, the sea too loud. The beautiful woman beside him looked like a stranger. In that moment, he realized that you can't burn a ship if your entire life is still on board. He had to go back. He had to make sure she was okay. He would tell her some lie, a sudden unavoidable business crisis in Zurich. He was good at lying. He just needed to see her to know that she and the baby were safe. Then he could disappear for good. Change of plans. He said, his voice strained. "We have to go back. There's an emergency at the company." Kendra's face fell. Her perfect smile replaced by a mask of petulant disbelief. "What Gideon know?" "You said you were done." "We just got here." "It's non-negotiable," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He was already on the phone with the aviation charter, his voice all command and authority again. "I need my jet fueled and ready for departure. Destination Teterboro, immediately." The escape was over. He was flying back into the storm, completely unaware that the storm was not what he thought it was. It was not a medical emergency or a heartbroken wife. It was something far colder, far more calculated, and it was waiting for him patiently in his home office. The sun rose over Manhattan, casting long shadows between the skyscrapers. In the Roths' penthouse, the morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the silent air. The bed, an acre of white Egyptian cotton, was empty on one side. The indentation of Gideon's head was still faintly visible on his pillow. Naomi Roth did not wake with a start. She did not wake with a gasp or a frantic search for the man who was supposed to be beside her. She awoke slowly, calmly at her usual time of 6:30 a.m., as the internal clock of her pregnancy had dictated for months. She lay still for a moment, feeling the gentle flutter of her son kicking beneath her ribs. She smiled a genuine, private smile. "Good morning, Leo," she whispered to her belly. Then, with a resolve that was as quiet and profound as the sunrise itself, she sat up. She looked at the empty side of the bed. She noted the missing weekender bag from Gideon's closet, the space on his valet tray where his Patek Philippe watch usually sat. There was no panic, no tears, just a deep, cold sense of confirmation. For a woman who looked the part of a pampered socialite, Naomi possessed a mind like a steel trap. Before she was Mrs. Gideon Roth, she was Naomi Prescott, a rising star in the world of forensic accounting. She had worked for Deloitte, specializing in uncovering complex financial fraud within multinational corporations. She could follow a single dollar through a labyrinth of shell companies, offshore accounts, and fraudulent invoices. She noticed patterns others missed. She was trained to see the truth buried beneath layers of deception. She had resigned after marrying Gideon, eager to embrace a new life. But the skills once honed never truly dulled. And for the past 4 months, she had been conducting the most important investigation of her career, her own husband. It had started with a subtle tell. A second phone she'd found charging in his gym bag, which he'd clumsily explained away as a dedicated international line for a sensitive deal in Singapore. Then came the unusual cash withdrawals from a secondary account, large, sporadic, and always just under the $10,000 federal reporting limit. To anyone else, they were nothing. To Naomi, they were red flags. She didn't confront him. She didn't cry or scream. She observed. She became the ghost in her own marriage, silently gathering data. While Gideon slept, she used her knowledge of his habits. His passwords were all variations of his first dog's name, and the year he founded his company to access his personal accounts. What she found was a meticulously constructed secret life. She hired a private investigator, a discreet ex-Mossad agent named Ari, who charged a small fortune and was worth every penny. Ari had provided the name Kendra Lowell. He provided photos of them at a secluded hotel in the Berkshires of Kendra, driving a new Porsche Cayenne, a car registered to a Delaware-based LLC that Naomi quickly traced back to a slush fund Gideon had set up years ago. But the real evidence, the kind that truly mattered, she found herself. Digging into Nexus Capital's financials, she discovered a pattern of consulting fees being paid out to that same LLC. Gideon was embezzling from his own company, siphoning millions of dollars to fund his affair and build his escape hatch. He was a brilliant CEO, but a sloppy criminal, blinded by arrogance. He never imagined his gentle art history major wife would be capable of untangling his web. He had catastrophically underestimated her. This morning was not a discovery. It was an execution. She rose from the bed and went not to the phone to call her friends in a panic, but to her home office. She bypassed the sleek Mac on her own desk and went to Gideon's imposing mahogany desk. She turned on his computer. A moment later, she was past his firewalls, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She downloaded the final pieces of evidence from the keylogger she had installed on his machine a month ago, transcripts of his encrypted chats with Kendra, his recent liquidation of personal stocks, the wire transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands. It was all there. A complete portrait of a man dismantling his life in preparation for a new one. At 7:15 a.m., she missed a call from her obstetrician, Dr. Hansen. She saw the name flash on the screen and silenced it. She had fabricated the arrhythmia story and told the doctor's office last week that she would be unreachable for a few days due to a family matter, asking them to please try her husband's number if they needed anything for scheduling. It was a cruel, necessary breadcrumb, a way to puncture his bubble of paradise and reel him back. At 8:00 a.m., she called her lawyer, Benjamin Carter, a bulldog of a man who specialized in high-asset divorces. "He's gone." "Ben," she said, her voice steady. "He left last night. The plan is in motion. The documents are ready." Naomi Carter's voice crackled over the phone. "Are you sure about this? Once we file, there's no going back." "I've been sure for months," she said. She looked around the opulent penthouse at the life Gideon had bought, a life he thought defined her. He thinks he was escaping a cage. He has no idea he just walked into a trap. She spent the rest of the day in a state of hyper-focused calm. She ate a healthy breakfast for the baby. She did her prenatal yoga. She packed a small bag for herself, not with designer clothes, but with essentials. A laptop, several hard drives, and a thick file folder bound with a rubber band. She wasn't a woman scorned. She was a predator whose prey had finally taken the bait. While Gideon was flying back across the Atlantic, fueled by a manufactured panic, Naomi was preparing the battlefield. The confrontation wouldn't be a tearful showdown in their bedroom. It would be a corporate execution in the one place he felt most powerful, his office. And she would be the one holding the axe. The descent into Teterboro Airport was turbulent. The Gulf Stream shuddered as it passed through a thick bank of clouds, and for Gideon the physical jolts were a perfect match for the chaos raging in his mind. The idyllic haze of St. Bart's had evaporated, replaced by the cold, sharp-edged panic of a man whose carefully constructed worlds were about to collide. Kendra sat across from him, sullen and silent. She had barely spoken a word since his abrupt decision to leave. Her arms were crossed, her face a mask of bitter disappointment. The dream had lasted less than a day. "I don't understand why I couldn't just stay at the villa," she said for the 5th time, her voice tight with resentment. "You could have handled this and come back." "It's complicated, Kendra." Gideon snapped his patience worn thin. "My COO is calling a snap board meeting. Something about a potential hostile takeover bid. It's all hands on deck. I need to be there." This was the lie he had settled on during the frantic flight. It was plausible urgent, and painted him as the indispensable hero swooping in to save his company. It was a much better narrative than "I panicked because my pregnant wife's doctor called." He had even called his COO Robert and left a vague authoritative voicemail about rumors and the need to circle the wagons, laying the groundwork for his story. "So this is it?" Then Kendra asked, her voice laced with accusation. "We run away, and the first sign of trouble you run right back." "This isn't running back," he insisted, leaning forward. "This is protecting the assets. Our assets. The money, the resources for our future. It's all tied to Nexus. I have to put this fire out, and then I'm done. I promise." She looked at him, her sharp eyes searching his for any sign of weakness. She was a transactionalist at her core. As long as the ultimate payout was secure, she could tolerate a delay. Finally, she nodded. "Fine. But you're putting me up at the Mandarin Oriental. And this had better be quick, Gid." As soon as the jet's wheels touched the tarmac, Gideon's world split. He became 2 men. One was the suave lover, ushering Kendra into a waiting town car, with a kiss and a promise to call her as soon as he was free. The other was the worried husband, pulling out his New York phone and dialing Naomi's number with shaking hands. Still voicemail. He called the doorman at their building. "Frank, it's Gideon Roth. Have you seen my wife this morning?" "Oh yes, Mr. Roth. Good morning, sir." Mrs. Roth left about an hour ago. A car picked her up. A car. "Did you see what kind?" "A black town car, sir. Looked like a corporate service." Relief washed over Gideon, so potent it almost made him dizzy. She was okay. She was up and about. She must have just gone to her doctor's appointment late. The arrhythmia was probably nothing, just as the doctor said. He had panicked over nothing. The guilt was instantly replaced by a fresh wave of irritation. He had cut his trip short, upset Kendra, and flown for 6 hours, all for a missed appointment. He got into his own waiting car, a sleek Audi A8, and barked directions to his driver. Nexus building, and step on it. During the drive into the city, he rehearsed his story for Naomi. He would be the hero. He'd heard about the takeover bid and had to come back immediately. He would express profound regret for not being able to tell her before he left, framing it as a selfless act to protect her from stress during the pregnancy. He would shower her with affection, promise her a makeup trip to any destination she desired. He would be so convincing, so loving, so utterly in control that she would never suspect a thing. By the time he was done, she would be apologizing to him for causing him to worry. His phone rang. It was Robert, his COO. Gideon. Thank God. What is this about a takeover? My phone has been ringing off the hook all morning. I've spoken to our largest shareholders, and no one has heard a thing. Are you sure your source is reliable? Gideon's brow furrowed. He had expected Robert to have heard the same rumors he had planted. Just get the board on a conference line for 3 p.m. We need to present a united front, he blustered, trying to maintain control of the narrative. The board is already here, Gideon. They're waiting for you in the main conference room. They've been here for an hour. What, why? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Robert's voice, when it came back, was strained and formal. They called the meeting Gideon, not me. They said it was urgent. They said it concerns your leadership. The blood drained from Gideon's face. This was not part of the plan. A board meeting called about him. It made no sense. He had delivered record profits for 10 consecutive quarters. He was the golden boy of fintech. He arrived at the towering glass headquarters of Nexus Capital a few minutes later. The lobby felt different, the usual deference of his employees replaced with nervous, averted glances. As he strode towards the executive elevators, his assistant, a young, perpetually terrified man named Peter, intercepted him. Mr. Roth. They're waiting in the Olympus room. And, sir, your wife is here. Gideon stopped dead. Naomi. Here. Why, Peter swallowed hard. She's with them, sir, in the conference room. She asked me to give you this when you arrived. Peter handed him a single sealed manila envelope. Gideon's name was written on the front in Naomi's elegant, familiar script. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. This was wrong. All of it was terribly, horribly wrong. He tore open the envelope. Inside was not a letter. It was a single, glossy photograph. It was a picture of the villa in Gouverneur, the one he and Kendra had just left. It was taken from a distance with a telephoto lens, but the image was crystal clear. 2 figures stood on the terrace, champagne glasses in hand, their heads close together in a conspiratorial toast. Gideon and Kendra. The photo was time-stamped. Yesterday. 4:17 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The carefully constructed walls of his lies crumbled into dust. She knew. While he was basking in the sun, she knew. While he was flying back, panicking about her health, she knew. The doctor's call, the missed appointment. It was all a trap. He looked up from the photo, his eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror. He was not the predator returning to his den. He was the prey walking blindly into the abattoir. And his quiet, gentle, pregnant wife was the one holding the butcher's knife. The Olympus room was on the 80th floor, a glass-walled sanctuary reserved for the most critical meetings of Nexus Capital. It boasted a panoramic view of New York City, a vista that had always made Gideon feel like a king surveying his domain. Today it felt like he was walking the plank. He pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped inside. The air was thick with a tense, funereal silence. The entire board of directors was there, 6 men and 2 women who owed their considerable wealth to his vision. They were seated around the massive granite table, their faces grim and unreadable. They did not look at him. Their eyes were all fixed on the person standing at the head of the table in the spot usually reserved for him. It was Naomi. She was wearing a simple but elegant navy blue maternity dress. Her hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, and her expression was one of serene, chilling composure. She looked directly at Gideon, her gaze not fiery with anger, but cold with the detached precision of a surgeon about to make the first incision. Beside her stood her lawyer, Benjamin Carter, his arms crossed, looking like a vulture, ready for a feast. Gideon Naomi said, her voice calm and even, echoing slightly in the silent room. "Thank you for joining us. Please take a seat." She gestured to the single empty chair directly opposite her. It felt less like an invitation and more like a defendant being directed to the stand. He walked to the chair. On legs that felt like lead, the photograph still clutched in his hand. He dropped into the seat, his eyes darting from Naomi to the stone-faced board members. "Naomi, what is this?" He began, trying to inject a tone of bewildered authority into his voice. "What's going on?" Robert said something about a board meeting. "This is not a board meeting, Gideon." Naomi interrupted, her voice cutting through his bluff. "It's an intervention, or perhaps more accurately, a receivership." From a leather portfolio in front of her, she slid a thick, spiral-bound document across the granite table. It stopped directly in front of him. The cover read, "Project Nightingale, an internal audit of the CEO's discretionary accounts." Project Nightingale. He whispered, his mouth suddenly dry. "It's what they call the person who sings." Naomi said, a flicker of something almost pitying in her eyes. "I thought it was appropriate. I suggest you open it." His hands trembled as he opened the report. It was his entire secret life laid bare in spreadsheets, charts, and financial statements. It was all there. The Delaware LLC, Lowell Holdings, the Porsche Cayenne, the wire transfers to the Cayman Islands, the fraudulent consulting fees paid out from Nexus Capital's accounts. It wasn't just evidence of an affair. It was a meticulously documented case of felony embezzlement. Page after page, his crimes were laid out in the cold, irrefutable language of forensic accounting. Naomi had missed nothing. She had tracked every dollar, every secret transaction, every lie. She had even included a projected timeline of his planned sabbatical, cross-referencing it with the liquidation of his stocks and the offshore transfers, presenting it as a clear plan to abscond with company funds. How he breathed, looking up at her, his mind reeling. "How did you? You thought I spent my days planning charity galas and picking out nursery colors, didn't you?" Naomi said, her voice still quiet, yet it filled the entire room. "You forgot who I was before I met you. You saw what you wanted to see, a beautiful, supportive, and slightly naive wife to complete the picture of your perfect life. An asset. You catastrophically misjudged your asset, Gideon." She then turned her attention to the board. For the past 4 months, she announced, her voice gaining strength and authority. "I have been conducting a private investigation into my husband's financial activities, both personal and corporate. What I found was a systematic pattern of fraud and embezzlement, totaling over $18 million from Nexus Capital." A collective gasp went through the room. Board member Harold Chen, an old friend of Gideon's father, looked pale. "This report," Naomi continued, gesturing to the copy in front of Gideon, "contains irrefutable proof of every transaction. Bank records, wire confirmations, shell company registrations, and sworn affidavits from the private investigators I employed. Everything you need to remove him for cause is in there. Gideon felt the floor drop out from under him. This wasn't a divorce negotiation. This was a corporate coup. She had him cornered not as a cheating husband, but as a criminal. "Naomi, please," he pleaded, his arrogance shattering, replaced by raw, desperate fear. "We can talk about this, privately. We're long past private conversations." "Gideon," she said. She then delivered the killing blow. "I have, however, prepared a solution that avoids this becoming a public spectacle. Because despite your actions, I have no desire to see the father of my child in prison, or to have the value of this company and my son's future inheritance destroyed by a federal investigation." Benjamin Carter stepped forward, placing a second, much thinner folder on the table. "This is a post-nuptial and severance agreement." The lawyer stated, his voice booming in the silence. "Mr. Roth will resign as CEO and from the board effective immediately. He will plead no contest in our divorce proceedings, citing irreconcilable differences. He will forfeit 75% of his personal assets, including all Nexus stock, to a trust established for his and Naomi's child, Leo Roth. The remaining 25% will be used as restitution to the company to repay the funds he misappropriated. He will cede all rights to the Tribeca penthouse and all other shared properties. In exchange for his full and immediate compliance, the findings of Project Nightingale will be sealed, and this board will agree to frame his departure as a voluntary resignation for personal health reasons. It was a complete and total annihilation. He would be left with nothing. No job, no money, no home. He would be erased. "You can't do this," Gideon stammered, looking around at the board members, searching for an ally. He found none. They stared back at him with the cold eyes of investors who had just seen their life's work threatened by the very man they had trusted to protect it. Naomi picked up a pen from the table. She held it out to him. "You have two options, Gideon," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "You can sign this document, walk out of this building with what's left of your dignity, and start over. Or you can refuse, and Mr. Carter will walk these findings over to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. The choice is yours. You have 5 minutes." The king was checkmated. The master of the universe had been outmaneuvered. He looked at his wife, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the brilliant, ruthless strategist. She had always been the woman he had been too arrogant and self-absorbed to ever truly know. And in her eyes, he saw the reflection of his own ruin. The 5 minutes Naomi gave him felt like both an eternity and a split second. Gideon's mind raced through 1,000 possibilities, 1,000 arguments and threats. But they all dissolved against the granite wall of her preparation. Every escape route was blocked. Every countermove had been anticipated. He was trapped in a cage of his own making, and she held the only key which she had no intention of using. He looked at the pen she held out to him. It was a simple black fountain pen. He had given it to her on their first anniversary, a symbol of the life they were supposed to write together. Now it was the instrument of his undoing. With a shaking hand he took the pen. The weight of it felt immense. He flipped to the last page of the agreement, his signature line waiting like an open grave. He could hear the frantic beating of his own heart, the only sound in the suffocating silence of the Olympus room. He signed his name, the name that had once been a hallmark of power and success. The ink looked black like poison on the crisp white page. He had just signed away his entire world. Benjamin Carter took the document, reviewed the signature, and gave Naomi a curt nod. It was done. A press release announcing your resignation for health reasons will be distributed in 1 hour. Naomi said, her voice now that of a CEO addressing a dismissed employee. Your corporate accounts and access have already been suspended. A security detail will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. You have 15 minutes. After that, they will escort you from the building. She didn't wait for a reply. She turned, and without a single backward glance, walked out of the Olympus room, her lawyer following in her wake. The board members, as if released from a spell, began to murmur amongst themselves, avoiding his gaze. Robert, his COO, and now his successor, gave him a look that was a mixture of pity and contempt. The walk to his office, flanked by 2 stoic security guards, was the longest walk of his life. Employees peered out from their cubicles, whispering. The news was already spreading. The king was being deposed, paraded through his own fallen kingdom. His office, once his sanctuary, felt alien. Naomi had been thorough. His personal laptop was gone. The family photos on his desk were gone. All that remained were the trappings of his job industry awards, deal trophies, a whiteboard covered in now meaningless projections. He numbly packed a few personal effects into a cardboard box, a framed photo of his late father, a couple of books, the pen Naomi had left behind. 15 minutes later, he was standing on the curb outside the Nexus building, holding a small, pathetic box of memories. The city bustled around him, indifferent to his spectacular fall from grace. He had no car, no driver. He was just another man on a New York street. He pulled out his burner phone and dialed Kendra's number. He needed someone, a familiar shore in this shipwreck. She answered on the second ring, her voice impatient. "Gideon. Are you done? I'm bored to death in this hotel room, and the room service is mediocre." "It's over, Kendra," he said, his voice hollow. "Great. So what's the plan? Are we going back to St. Bart's tonight?" "No, you don't understand," he said, the words catching in his throat. "Everything is gone. The company, the money, the apartment, all of it. She took it all." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. He could practically hear the gears turning in her mind, recalculating, reassessing her investment. "What do you mean she took it all?" Kendra's voice was sharp, stripped of its seductive warmth. "What about the money in the Caymans?" "Our money. It's part of the settlement." "Restitution," he choked out. "It's gone." Another pause, colder and longer than the first. When she finally spoke, her voice was unrecognizable. It was the voice of a creditor calling in a bad debt. "So let me get this straight," she said, her words dripping with venom. "You blew up your life, you brought me along for the ride, and you're walking away with nothing." "You have nothing. He started, but he had no answer. "You are a fool, Gideon," she hissed. "A weak, pathetic fool. Don't ever call me again." The line went dead. He stood there, phone in hand, as the full weight of his isolation crashed down upon him. He had betrayed his loyal, brilliant wife for a woman who had just discarded him like a bad investment the second his stock plummeted. He had traded a priceless treasure for a worthless piece of glass. He had nowhere to go. He couldn't face his parents. His friends were all business associates who would scatter now that he was powerless. He started walking with no destination in mind, just one of the millions of anonymous faces in the urban sprawl, a ghost haunted by the empire he had built and lost in a single day. The silence from Naomi was more damning than any scream could ever be. She hadn't just divorced him, she had deleted him. 6 months later, the city had shed its autumnal colors, for the stark, crystalline beauty of winter. The frantic energy of Manhattan felt a world away from the quiet, tree-lined streets of Brooklyn Heights, where Naomi now lived. The Tribeca penthouse, a monument to a life that no longer existed, had been sold. Its cold, minimalist spaces and ghost-filled memories were traded for the warmth of a 4-story brownstone with original moldings and a small, snow-dusted garden out back. The air here smelled of old wood lemon polish and faintly of the baby powder and milk that now defined Naomi's world. Her life was no longer measured by galas and board meetings, but by feeding schedules and the miraculous weight of a sleeping child in her arms. Leo Prescott. Roth had arrived in late November, a healthy 7-pound declaration of the future. He was a perfect fusion of his parents, possessing Gideon's dark, thick hair and expressive brows, but with Naomi's calm, unnervingly perceptive grey eyes. Sometimes, when she looked at him, a pang of the past would echo in her heart, a phantom limb of a life she'd been forced to amputate. But then he would grasp her finger with his tiny, perfect hand, and the ghost would recede, replaced by a love so fierce and absolute it felt like the sun. This was her new empire. Not a glass tower scraping the sky, but the 4 walls of a home filled with light and the soft gurgle of a happy baby. Her days were a peaceful rhythm of domesticity, but her mind remained as sharp as ever. She managed the Leo Roth Trust with the same quiet precision she had used to dismantle Gideon's life. She had weekly calls with Robert Nexus Capital's new CEO. Her input, subtle but incisive, guiding the company her son would one day inherit. She had transformed from a silent partner into a silent ruler, her power more profound for being unseen. She was not a woman recovering. She was a woman remade, forged in the fires of betrayal, and stronger for the heat. One crisp December afternoon, she decided to take Leo for a walk. The air was frigid, but the sun was bright, glinting off the icy branches of the trees in the park. Leo was nestled in his stroller, swaddled in a cashmere blanket, his rosy cheeks the only part of him visible beneath a tiny woolen hat. The rhythmic crunch of Naomi's boots on the frosted path was a soothing percussion to the quiet of the day. It was a moment of perfect, earned peace. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She glanced at the screen, expecting it to be her mother, or perhaps Benjamin Carter, with a quarterly update. Instead, the screen showed a blocked, unknown number. Her first instinct was to ignore it, to dismiss it as a telemarketer intruding on her sanctuary. But something, a flicker of intuition, as cold and sharp as the winter air, made her pause. She stopped the stroller by a wrought-iron bench overlooking the East River and answered, her voice neutral. "Hello." A moment of static-filled silence, then a voice hesitant and rough, as if it hadn't been used for some time. "Naomi." Her breath caught in her throat. Her hand tightened on the handle of the stroller. The voice was an echo from a buried life stripped of its familiar timbre of command and arrogance, but it was unmistakably his. It was Gideon. She said nothing, her silence a shield. "Naomi." "Are you there?" he asked, a note of desperation creeping in. She finally found her voice, the words emerging colder than she intended. "What do you want, Gideon?" A ragged exhale on the other end of the line. I heard about the baby." He said the words tumbling out, as if he'd rehearsed them 1,000 times. "I saw a picture. A friend of a friend. They sent it to me. He's He's beautiful now. The old nickname, once a term of endearment, whispered in the dark, now felt like a trespass, a violation of the new life she had so carefully constructed. "He is," she replied, her voice flat. She looked down at Leo, who stirred slightly in his sleep, his little mouth making a soft, sucking motion. She felt a surge of protectiveness, so intense it was almost painful. I'm in a program," Gideon continued, his voice cracking. "A 12-step thing. For a lot of things. My therapist calls it pathological narcissism, ego, sex addiction. I'm trying to really understand why I did what I did, why I threw away everything." He paused, and she could hear the hollow sound of the room he must be in. "I'm working a job at a hardware store out in Queens, stocking shelves, mixing paint. It's humbling." Naomi imagined it Gideon Roth, the man who wore $10,000 suits and commanded billion-dollar deals wearing a canvas apron, his hands dusty with spackle. The image should have brought a sense of satisfaction of schadenfreude. Instead, she felt a profound and weary sadness. The waste of it all. "I know I have no right to ask this," he said, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. "I know I gave up everything. I forfeited my rights. I signed the papers. But I was wondering if maybe someday, far in the future, I could see him. Just once. I don't want anything. I won't ask for money or forgiveness. I just want to see my son." The plea hung in the frozen air between them. Her mind, the forensic accountant's mind, saw it as a negotiation, a first move in a long game to re-enter their lives. Her heart, the mother's heart, heard only the broken plea of a father. She looked across the river at the Manhattan skyline, the glass towers like shards of a distant, painful memory. She had won. She had taken everything from him, just as he had planned to do to her. She had the power, the money, the control. And most importantly, she had their son. She could just say no. She could hang up the phone, block his number, and he would have no recourse. It would be a clean, final act of erasure. But then she looked down at Leo's sleeping face. She saw the shape of Gideon's jaw in the soft curve of her son's, the shadow of his brow over eyes that were all her own. One day, this tiny, innocent being would grow up. He would ask questions. He would have a void in his life in the shape of a father, and that void could fill with anger, with resentment, with a confusion that could poison him. Denying Gideon completely might protect her. But would it truly protect her son? Her entire plan had been about securing Leo's future. What kind of future would it be if it was built on a foundation of her own bitterness, however justified? The final act of her victory, she realized, could not be vengeance. It had to be grace. "Leo deserves to know his father," she said, finally, her voice clear and steady, the decision settling within her, solid and sure. "But you won't be his father until you become a man he can be proud of. You won't be the man on the cover of Forbes, and you won't be the man who stocks shelves in Queens. You have to become someone new." She could hear him holding his breath on the other end of the line. "So keep working your program," she continued, her voice, the sound of steel wrapped in velvet. "Stay sober. Find a life that has meaning beyond a balance sheet. Build something real, something that comes from your hands and your heart, not your ego. When you've done that for a long, long time, years, Gideon, you can call me again, and we'll see. It was not a yes. It was not forgiveness. But it was not a no. It was a chance, a sliver of light at the end of a long, dark tunnel of his own creation. It was more than he deserved, and it was a final, quiet testament to the strength of the woman he had so profoundly misunderstood. A choked, ragged sound came through the phone. A sob. "Thank you, Naomi," he whispered the two words, carrying the weight of his entire fallen world. "Thank you." She ended the call without saying goodbye, and slid the phone back into her pocket. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. She adjusted Leo's blanket, shielding him from the wind that swept off the river, and began to walk again. The path ahead was bathed in the golden light of the fading day. She was no longer Naomi Roth, the millionaire's wife, nor was she simply Naomi Prescott, the forensic accountant. She was Naomi, a mother, the architect of a new life, a survivor who had faced the ultimate betrayal and had not only weathered the storm, but had emerged commanding the winds. Her past was settled. Her future and her son's was just beginning. The story of Gideon and Naomi Roth is a chilling reminder that the quietest people in the room are often the most powerful. It's a story about the devastating consequences of arrogance and a testament to the unbreakable strength of a woman who was pushed to the edge and decided to build a new world from the rubble of her old one. Gideon thought he was escaping a gilded cage, only to discover he had been living with a brilliant lioness who knew the value of patience and the art of the perfect trap. His betrayal was loud and reckless. Her response was silent, strategic, and absolute. What would you have done in Naomi's shoes? Could you have maintained such cold, calculated composure in the face of such a deep betrayal? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of deception and empowerment, please smash that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a good story, and make sure you hit subscribe and ring that notification bell. We have more tales of real-life drama and shocking twists coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one.